The Mafia boss celebrated his promotion until the black waitress leaned in and said, "Get out now." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a night of celebration, and everything was set for a perfect evening. Dominic, the youngest mafia boss in New York, was in high spirits. The restaurant was grand, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, and the golden light reflected off the polished floors. His promotion was official. The power he had fought for was finally his. For the first time in months, Dominic allowed himself to relax, sitting at the head of the table in the VIP section with a glass of fine red wine in hand. The guests surrounding him were a mix of powerful associates and family members who had come to celebrate the occasion. The laughter and chatter filled the air, but there was one person who wasn't joining in. Mariah, a waitress who had only been working at the restaurant for a few weeks, was nervous. She had heard the rumors about Dominic. Everyone had. He was ruthless, the kind of man who could end someone's life with a single word. But what no one told her was how different he appeared in person. He sat with an aura of authority, yes, but there was something unsettlingly calm about him as well. As she moved around the table, pouring wine and delivering food, Mariah tried her best to blend into the background. She was used to being invisible, a servant in a world that didn't notice her. But that night was different. It wasn't just another shift. It was the night that would change everything. As Mariah approached the table with a tray of drinks, one of the guests made a remark. "How slow can she be?" he sneered, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. His words were laced with contempt, and Mariah felt the sting in her chest. She didn't say a word, though. She never did. Not when they mocked her accent, not when they made fun of her clothes, and certainly not when they saw her as nothing more than a background figure. But this time, something was different. As she served the table, another guest joined in. "Is she even qualified for this job?" His laughter echoed around the table, and the other guests joined in, making jokes at her expense. Dominic, sitting at the head of the table, watched in silence. His dark eyes followed every movement she made, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. His reputation alone spoke volumes. As Mariah passed the last of the wine, she could feel the weight of the looks on her. It wasn't just the guests now. Even the staff looked at her with disdain. She could feel her hands shaking as she placed the empty bottle on the table. "She's just a waitress," one of the men said, louder than the others, almost as if he was making sure everyone could hear. The words cut deep, and Mariah's heart sank. She stood there for a moment, unable to move. She had become the target of their mockery, their entertainment for the evening. But as she looked up, something changed. Dominic's gaze was on her. For the first time, she caught his eye. It wasn't a look of superiority or disdain like the others. No, it was different. It was intense, almost calculating, but there was something else there too, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. For a brief second, their eyes locked, and in that moment, she knew. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything for her. Dominic had witnessed her humiliation, but he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, his lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. The moment stretched, and the noise from the table faded into the background. The powerful mafia boss, sitting amongst his guests, looked at the young woman who had just become the target of their cruelty. And in that silence, something began to shift. The tension in the room was palpable as Dominic's gaze lingered on Mariah. The laughter and mocking comments from the guests felt like distant echoes, overshadowed by the intensity in his eyes. Mariah stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had been the subject of ridicule for so long that her body had learned to take it without reacting. But today, something was different. The way Dominic looked at her was not with disdain like the others. There was something else there, something that felt like recognition. For the briefest of moments, it seemed as though he was studying her, reading her every move. The silence between them stretched, and Mariah's heart raced as she tried to steady her breath. It was as if time had slowed down. Then, without warning, Dominic spoke, his voice cutting through the noise of the room. "Are you okay?" The words were simple, but there was an undertone of something deeper, something Mariah had never expected from someone like him. She blinked, taken aback by his sudden attention. In that moment, the harsh words from the guests faded away. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her stomach flutter, but it was not the kind of flutter she had felt from the mocking stares earlier. This felt different. It felt like he was truly seeing her, not as a servant, but as a person. Mariah opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. Her voice was caught in her throat, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. For years, she had been nothing but a shadow in the background. But now, Dominic, the Mafia boss who held the power of life and death in his hands, was standing there, asking if she was okay. She had to blink again, trying to process the moment. Yes, she managed to whisper, though it didn't feel like it was enough. Dominic nodded slightly, his lips pressed into a firm line. He didn't say anything more, but the way he looked at her left her with a strange sense of unease. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, but there was also something else there, something that made her feel seen for the first time in a long while. The moment was fleeting, and just as quickly as it had happened, Dominic turned his attention back to the table, his demeanor once again cold and distant. The conversation at the table resumed, but Mariah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She continued to serve, her hands trembling slightly as she moved from one guest to the next, but her mind was still on Dominic. What had just happened? Why had he asked? About her? The evening dragged on, and the guests continued to enjoy themselves, unaware of the subtle shift that had occurred. As the night wore on, Dominic remained at the center of attention, but Mariah couldn't shake the thought that there was more to him than the cold, calculating boss everyone feared. The way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, it was as if he saw something in her that the others didn't. The rest of the night passed in a blur for Mariah. The guests laughed and drank, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that still hung in the air. She was still the same waitress, still invisible to most of them, but in the back of her mind, the image of Dominic's intense gaze lingered. What did it mean? Why had he noticed her? As the evening came to a close and the last of the guests left the restaurant, Mariah found herself still thinking about the brief moment when everything had felt different. She had never expected to be noticed by someone like him, but now, the questions in her mind seemed endless. Dominic's presence had filled the room with power, but in that single moment, it had felt as though his attention was solely on her. Mariah didn't know what to make of it. She was used to being invisible, to being ignored, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, someone had seen her for who she really was. She shook her head as she cleared the tables, trying to push the thoughts aside. It was just a moment, a fleeting exchange, nothing more. Or was it? Mariah couldn't shake the feeling of Dominic's gaze as she cleaned the last of the tables that night. It was as though his eyes were still on her, following her every movement, though he was no longer in the room. She tried to focus, wiping down the glassware and stacking the silverware, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment. The way he looked at her, not with the same contempt the others had, but with a kind of intensity that made her heart race. She had never been the object of someone's attention in this way before, certainly not from a man like Dominic. She had always been invisible, just another face in the crowd, another servant in the background. But now, something had changed. Something she couldn't explain. As she finished her work, Mariah found herself lingering by the kitchen, unsure of what to do next. She glanced at the clock, midnight. The restaurant was closing, and it was time for everyone to go home. The staff members who were still around were chatting, preparing to leave, but Mariah couldn't bring herself to join them. Her mind was too busy replaying the events of the night. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart pounding in her chest, and found herself face to face with Dominic. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his tall figure looming over her. His suit, still pristine, caught the soft light of the overhead bulbs. He had an air of control about him. But tonight, there was something else, something softer in his eyes. "Mariah," he said, his voice calm and steady, but there was a hint of something else in it, something she couldn't quite place. "I want to talk to you." Mariah felt a wave of heat rise to her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was completely caught off guard. She had never imagined this. Dominic, the Mafia boss, wanted to talk to her. Her mind raced, trying to figure out why he had singled her out. She wasn't anyone special. She was just a waitress, just another worker in a sea of people who serve the rich and powerful. Yet here he was, asking for her. I don't know what to say, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. You don't have to say anything, Mariah. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. What happened back there? It wasn't right. The words took her by surprise. No one had ever cared enough to say that. No one had ever acknowledged how she was treated, how she was looked down upon simply because of who she was. She had gotten used to the insults, the mocking laughter, but hearing him say it, hearing him speak about it like it actually mattered, it made something inside her shift. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. I'm fine, she said, forcing a smile, though her throat felt tight. Dominic stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. I don't think you are, he said softly. His gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in him. It was almost as if he was letting down his guard, just for a moment. It was as though he understood what she had been through. The world Dominic inhabited was far removed from hers. He lived in a realm of power, of fear and respect, but right now, in this small kitchen, he was just a man who had seen her pain, who understood it. You're not invisible to me, he said, his voice low, but carrying weight. The words lingered in the air between them, and Mariah felt a knot tighten in her chest. It was like a door had been opened, one she hadn't known existed. Thank you, she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to him or to the universe for finally hearing her. Dominic nodded, his expression unreadable. I don't expect you to forget what happened tonight, he said, but I want you to know that you're not alone. You never have been. For a moment, they just stood there, locked in a moment of understanding, a connection forged from shared experiences that neither could deny. Mariah felt the weight of the night lift from her shoulders. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it felt a little less heavy. I appreciate that, she said, her voice steady now, though her heart was still racing. Dominic nodded again, as though he had said all he needed to say. He turned to leave, but then paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. Get some rest, he said. You deserve it. With that, he walked out, leaving Mariah standing in the kitchen, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Why had he said that? But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. She would never be the same again. The night had shifted something in her, and now, for the first time, she felt as though she had a place in this world. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, Dominic had played a part in it. As she finished cleaning up the kitchen, Mariah allowed herself to smile, a small, tentative smile. She wasn't invisible anymore. And maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change. The following days after Dominic's quiet words in the kitchen weighed heavily on Mariah. She couldn't help but replay the moments in her mind. His gaze, the soft tone of his voice, the way he seemed to truly understand her pain. It was all so unexpected. She had always been the invisible one, the one who could endure anything as long as she kept her head down and stayed out of the way. But now, something had shifted. It wasn't just the way Dominic had treated her that night, it was everything. For the first time, she had been seen, really seen, by someone in power. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it had made her feel both vulnerable and empowered at the same time. As the week went on, Mariah found herself walking through the restaurant with her head held a little higher. The mocking remarks that once stung didn't hurt as much. She knew they still came, the whispers behind her back, the jokes when she passed by, but now she no longer felt invisible. Not to Dominic. Not to herself. Then, one evening, as she was cleaning off a table near the back of the restaurant, she felt the familiar, intense gaze once again. She glanced up and met Dominic's eyes across the room. This time, it was different. Instead of the brief exchange they had shared the last time, this time, he didn't look away. He didn't turn back to his guests or resume his conversation. He simply watched her. And then, he stood up. Mariah froze, her hands still gripping the cloth she had been using to wipe down the table. She watched, almost in slow motion, as Dominic made his way toward her. The sound of the restaurant seemed to fade, replaced by the rapid beating of her heart. Was this another one of those moments? Another conversation she wasn't prepared for? Mariah, Dominic's voice cut through the silence, and it was like everything around them disappeared. She looked up, forcing herself to maintain composure. Yes, sir? She couldn't help the nervousness that slipped into her voice. He gave her a small, reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes but still held warmth. "Please, don't call me sir," he said, his tone gentle, almost amused. "My name is Dominic." She nodded, a little flustered, but still standing firm. He was closer now, just a few feet away. "I noticed you've been working hard lately." "I respect that." Mariah blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. Dominic was always so distant, so untouchable. To hear him speak to her like this, so directly, so casually, was unsettling. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Thank you. I do my best." He regarded her for a moment, his eyes scanning her face as if he was looking for something. For what? She didn't know. She felt exposed, but not in a way that made her uncomfortable. Instead, it was as if he was trying to understand her, trying to read between the lines. "You're more than just a waitress, Mariah," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "I can see that. There's more to you than what's on the surface." The compliment, unexpected and so out of place in this world, made her heart race again. She was used to being overlooked, underestimated. But here, now, in front of this powerful man, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? She was just a woman working at a restaurant, part of the background noise of his empire. She wasn't supposed to be seen like this. But there he was, Dominic, looking at her with those eyes that held so many questions. "You have a lot of potential," he added, almost as though he was speaking to himself. Mariah opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She wasn't sure how to handle this conversation. It was too much, too soon. But before she could form the words, Dominic gave a small nod, almost as if he had made a decision. "I think you should take the night off," he said. "Go home, rest." Mariah was taken aback. She wasn't expecting that. "But, sir, no arguments," he said, cutting her off gently. "You've been working hard, and you deserve a break. Take tonight for yourself. It's the least I can do." For a moment, Mariah stood there, unsure of what to say. Was this some kind of test? Did he really mean it? She looked around the restaurant, at the staff who were all still finishing up their duties, and then back at him. She had never been given an order like this before. Never been told to stop working, to take care of herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, almost overwhelmed. Dominic gave her a small smile, the first one that felt genuinely kind. "Go on. I'll see you tomorrow." As she turned to leave, she felt something inside her stir. It was more than just relief. It was the sense that, for the first time, someone had cared enough to see her. She wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Mariah walked out of the restaurant that night, her steps slow and deliberate as she processed everything that had happened. Dominic, the Mafia boss, had told her to take the night off. She had never been given such an order before, let alone one from someone of his stature. It felt almost surreal, like she was stepping out of the shadows of her life into something new. As she walked through the streets of the city, the familiar hum of the nightlife surrounding her, Mariah found herself lost in thought. She had always kept her head down, doing what she had to do to survive. But now, for the first time, she had been seen. Not just as a waitress, but as someone worthy of respect. Dominic's words echoed in her mind. "You have potential." What did he mean by that? What was he really offering her? It wasn't just the night off. It was the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, as if she mattered. She had never experienced that kind of attention before, certainly not from someone like him. The rest of the world saw her as just another part of the machinery, a background figure that could be easily replaced. But Dominic, he had seen something else. By the time she reached her apartment, the thoughts in her head had become a swirling storm. She unlocked the door to her small, modest space and stepped inside. The apartment was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the restaurant. She dropped her bag on the couch and went to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights of the skyscrapers twinkled in the distance, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream. What would it be like, she wondered, to have a life where she wasn't invisible, to be seen for who she truly was? But then the weight of reality settled in. She couldn't afford to dream too much. She had bills to pay, a mother to support, and a future that seemed so far out of reach. She had always been practical, always kept her emotions in check, because that was how you survived in a world that only valued power. But now, Dominic's words kept coming back to her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. something that she couldn't ignore. The next few days passed by in a blur. Mariah continued to work at the restaurant, but her interactions with Dominic became more frequent. He would give her small tasks, ask her how she was doing, and always, he would look at her with that same intensity. It was as though he was watching her closely, assessing her in a way that made her both uncomfortable and, oddly enough, more confident. She wasn't used to this attention, but there was something in Dominic's presence that made her feel like she was capable of more than just serving drinks and cleaning tables. One evening, after another long shift, Mariah was cleaning up when Dominic approached her once again. This time, there was a different energy about him. His usual cold demeanor had softened, just a little, and his gaze was more understanding. "You've been working hard," he said, his voice low, as always, but there was a warmth behind it. "I can see that." Mariah stopped what she was doing and looked up at him, unsure of how to respond. She was used to working without recognition, to going unnoticed, but this was different. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. She didn't know what else to say. Dominic studied her for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "You have more potential than you give yourself credit for." Mariah's heart skipped a beat. Was he offering her something? Was this the opportunity she had been waiting for? She didn't want to get her hopes up, but Dominic's words were hard to ignore. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully, trying to mask the uncertainty in her voice. "I'm just a waitress." Dominic smiled, the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. "You're not just a waitress, Mariah. You're capable of much more than that." "I see it." Mariah felt a mixture of disbelief and hope. She had spent so much of her life keeping her head down, doing what she was told, that she couldn't remember the last time someone had seen her as anything other than what she appeared to be. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic paused for a moment, as if considering how best to phrase his next words. "I want to offer you something," he said finally. "Something that could change everything for you." Mariah's pulse quickened. Was this really happening? Was Dominic, the Mafia boss, offering her a chance at something more? "What is it?" she asked, her heart racing with anticipation. He looked at her for a moment, as if weighing his words, before answering. "I want you to work with me," he said simply. "Not as a waitress, but in a position where you can actually use your mind, your skills." Mariah's head was spinning. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an opportunity, a chance to leave behind the life she had known. But could she trust him? Could she trust someone like Dominic? The man who had so much power, who controlled so much. But then again, maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for her whole life. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. As Dominic stood there, waiting for her response, Mariah knew one thing for sure. Everything was about to change. Mariah stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as Dominic's words hung in the air. Work with him. The offer sounded so simple, so straightforward, yet it carried weight, a weight that felt impossible to ignore. She had been a waitress her entire life, barely scraping by, invisible in the eyes of the world. But Dominic saw something in her. Something that made him offer her a chance at a life she had never dared dream of. The restaurant had always been her world, a place where she worked tirelessly, serving others, always in the background. But now, standing in front of the Mafia boss, she felt as though the world was shifting, turning in a way she couldn't quite comprehend. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her heart racing in her chest. Her mind raced faster than her words could follow. Was this really happening? Was he really offering her something more than just another shift at the restaurant? "You don't have to say anything right now," Dominic replied, his voice steady and calm. "But think about it. This could be your chance to change everything. You've got more potential than you think, Mariah." His words were like a spark, igniting something deep within her, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the first time, someone believed in her. Dominic had always been a figure of power, a man who controlled empires with a single word. To most, he was a ruthless Mafia boss. But here, standing in front of her, he wasn't just the leader of a criminal empire. He was a man who saw something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. "What would I even be doing?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with curiosity. "You've got sharp instincts, Mariah," Dominic said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "You can see things that others can't." I need someone who can think on their feet, someone who isn't afraid to speak up when they see something wrong. I'm offering you a position where you'll be involved in decisions that actually matter. You won't be just serving drinks anymore." Mariah felt the weight of his words sink in. Decisions that actually mattered. She had always been behind the scenes, doing the hard work while others reaped the benefits. But now, Dominic was offering her a chance to step into the light, to be a part of something bigger than herself. "What kind of decisions?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. Dominic's eyes flickered with something like amusement, but there was a sharpness behind his gaze. "I can't tell you everything right now," he said, his voice low and measured. "But trust me, you'll be given more responsibility. I'll make sure of it. You'll be in the room when things happen, and you'll have a say in what happens next." The thought of having a voice, of being a part of something important, made her pulse quicken. She had never considered herself capable of making decisions of that magnitude, but the idea of being given that power, that responsibility, was something she couldn't ignore. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why choose me for something like this?" Dominic stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the dimly lit restaurant. "Because I see something in you that others don't," he said, his tone soft but full of conviction. "You're more than just a waitress, Mariah. You've got a fire in you, a drive that's rare. I don't offer this to just anyone." The sincerity in his voice made her stomach twist with uncertainty, but also excitement. Could it really be true? Could she really be capable of more than she had ever imagined? "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that," Mariah admitted, her voice tinged with doubt. Dominic smiled, the edges of his lips curling into something almost gentle. "You don't have to be ready," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'll help you get there. I believe in you, Mariah, and that's all you need to start." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Mariah's mind spun, torn between the life she knew, the one where she was invisible, a mere servant to others, and the life Dominic was offering. A life where she could actually make a difference, where she could be seen for who she truly was. The idea terrified her, but it also filled her with an overwhelming sense of possibility. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Dominic nodded, as though he had expected that answer. "Take your time," he said, "but know that the offer stands. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Mariah standing in the middle of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. The world felt different now, heavier with possibility. As she watched Dominic disappear into the back office, she couldn't help but wonder, was she really ready for this? Was she ready to step into a world where her voice mattered, where she wasn't just a background figure anymore? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Mariah sat in her small apartment, the silence around her almost suffocating. The offer from Dominic kept echoing in her mind. She had spent the past few days thinking about it, weighing the possibilities, and wondering if she was really ready to take that step. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this might be her only chance to break free from the life she had always known. She was tired of being invisible, of being overlooked and underestimated. She wanted more than just serving drinks and cleaning tables. She wanted to be someone who mattered. She wanted to be seen. The question was, could she really step into that world? Could she work alongside Dominic, the man who controlled so much, the man who had seen something in her that no one else had? Was she capable of more than just the role she had been assigned? The doubts swirled in her head, but as she glanced around her apartment, the same four walls that had witnessed her struggles for so long, she knew deep down that this was her moment. If she didn't take it, she would always wonder what could have been. The thought of leaving everything she knew behind, the familiar routine, the people who had dismissed her for so long, was terrifying. But it was also exhilarating. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had control over her own future. The next day, as she walked into the restaurant, Mariah felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had already made up her mind. She was going to talk to Dominic. She wasn't sure what that would mean for her future, but she knew that staying in the same place, in the same life, wasn't an option anymore. She needed to take the chance. As she stepped into the staff area, she spotted Dominic sitting at his usual table in the VIP section, a few of his associates gathered around him. The room was buzzing with activity, but Dominic's presence made it all seem distant. His dark eyes caught hers almost immediately, and for a split second, Mariah felt that same spark of recognition, the feeling that he saw her, really saw her, in a way that no one else had. She hesitated, then walked over to him, her steps steady, though her heart was racing. "Dominic," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. He looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. "Mariah," he greeted her, his voice smooth, almost as if he had been expecting her. "How are you?" "I'm good," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what she was about to say. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the opportunity you offered me." Dominic nodded slightly, as if he was waiting for her to continue. "I've decided," she said, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready. I want to take the chance. I want to work with you." There was a brief pause, and for a moment, Mariah wondered if she had made the right choice. But then Dominic's face softened, and he leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice low but full of warmth. "You won't regret this, Mariah. I see something in you, and I'm not the only one." The way he said it made her feel like something had shifted, like this wasn't just about the job. It was about her, her potential, her future. Dominic wasn't just offering her a position. He was offering her a chance to step into a world that she had never imagined. "What will I be doing?" she asked, still unsure of what exactly it all meant. Dominic smiled, the faintest hint of a grin on his lips. "For now, we'll start with small tasks, things that will help you get your feet wet. You'll be involved in more decisions, more important ones. I'll make sure you're involved in everything, Mariah." She nodded, a mix of excitement and uncertainty swirling inside her. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. But as she looked at Dominic, she realized something else. This wasn't just about the job. It wasn't just about the power or the prestige. It was about proving to herself that she was more than just a waitress. She was more than just a background figure in someone else's story. She was her own person, capable of great things. "I'll do my best," she said quietly, the words feeling like a promise. "I know you will," Dominic replied, his eyes softening. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow we begin." Mariah walked away, her heart still racing, but her mind clearer than it had ever been. This was her chance, her opportunity to change everything. And no matter what happened next, she was ready to take it. Mariah stood at the entrance of Dominic's office, the door slightly ajar, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She had agreed to take the opportunity Dominic had offered her, but now, she was about to find out what that really meant. She wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this restaurant just a few weeks ago. Now, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something that could change the course of her life. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Dominic was sitting at his desk, his back to her, looking over a stack of papers. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps, but he didn't need to. It was as if he had known she was there the whole time. "Come in," he said, his voice calm and collected, as always. Mariah entered the room, closing the door softly behind her. The space was just as imposing as she remembered, sleek, dark wood furniture, the faint smell of expensive cologne in the air. But today, it felt different. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders, and she stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I'm here," she said, finally breaking the silence. Dominic glanced up, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for the briefest moment, she saw something in his expression, something that wasn't just business. "I know," he replied, the corners of his mouth curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I've been expecting you." Mariah stood a little straighter, trying to find her footing in this unfamiliar world. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of nerves. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "First, I want you to understand something," he said, his voice low and serious. "You're not just here to serve drinks or clean up after the guests. You're here because I believe you have something more to offer." Mariah's heart skipped a beat. The way he spoke made it feel like this was no ordinary job. It was something bigger. "I'm ready," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Dominic gave a slight nod. "Good. But I want you to know that this isn't going to be easy. You'll be stepping into a world that's not like anything you've seen before." Mariah swallowed, her nerves flaring. What kind of world was he talking about? She had worked hard all her life, but nothing could have prepared her for what Dominic was offering. "What do I need to do?" she asked, more determined than ever. Dominic's expression softened, just a little, and he stood up from behind his desk. "I need you to help me keep things running smoothly," he said. "You'll be working with me directly, handling certain tasks, helping to organize the operations we have going on." Mariah nodded, trying to absorb everything he was saying. "I understand," she replied. She wasn't sure exactly what he meant by operations, but she knew one thing for sure. It was big. It was everything she had dreamed of but never thought was possible for someone like her. "You'll be learning quickly," Dominic continued, his voice steady. "But I'm going to make sure you have the tools you need. You'll be part of my inner circle." The weight of his words sank in, and Mariah could hardly believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just a promotion. It was an entirely new life. A life she had never even imagined for herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. Dominic gave a slight nod, his gaze softening for just a moment. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The real work starts now." Mariah stood there, trying to keep her composure, but inside, her heart was racing. This was the chance she had been waiting for, the opportunity to step out of the shadows and into the light. She wasn't just going to be another waitress anymore. She was going to be someone who mattered. "What's the first step?" she asked, ready to dive into whatever came next. Dominic walked over to a table in the corner of the room and handed her a folder. "This is where you start. There are things we need to take care of, and you'll be handling the details. It's a lot of responsibility, but I know you're up to the task." Mariah took the folder from him, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was full of papers, contracts, and what looked like schedules. She opened it slowly, her heart still racing. This was her first real test. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice firm now, the nerves from earlier replaced by a newfound confidence. Dominic smiled slightly, the hint of approval in his gaze. "I know you won't." Mariah glanced down at the folder, then back up at Dominic. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned up after others. She was no longer invisible. She was a part of something bigger now, something powerful. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, she felt like she had a future she could control, and she wasn't going to waste it. The days following Mariah's meeting with Dominic felt like a whirlwind. Each day brought something new, something different. She was no longer just another waitress at a restaurant. She was stepping into a world she had only ever dreamed of. The tasks Dominic assigned her were not what she had expected. They weren't just about organizing or running errands. They involved handling real business decisions, negotiating deals, and coordinating operations that stretched far beyond the restaurant. Dominic's confidence in her was overwhelming, but Mariah found herself rising to the challenge. She was learning quickly, adapting to the fast-paced environment, and becoming a key part of the team. But with each new responsibility, the weight of what she had agreed to grew heavier. Dominic's empire was vast, and the stakes were high. There were moments when Mariah would catch herself questioning if she was truly ready for this new life. But then she would remember the reason she had taken this leap, to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. As the weeks passed, Mariah's confidence grew. She had gained Dominic's trust, and with that trust came more responsibility. He would often call on her for advice or to help him with sensitive matters. He didn't just see her as a worker, he saw her as an equal. It was something she had never experienced before. But despite the progress she was making, there were still moments when she felt out of her depth. One afternoon, Dominic asked her to accompany him to a meeting with some of his most trusted associates. It was the first time she would sit in on one of these high-stakes discussions, and she couldn't help but feel a rush of anxiety. She had seen Dominic in action before, effortlessly commanding respect from everyone in the room. But now, she would be expected to hold her own. The meeting took place in a sleek, private office high above the city. The view from the windows was breathtaking, but Mariah couldn't focus on that. Her mind was racing with thoughts of what she needed to do to prove herself. Dominic, as always, remained calm and composed. He introduced her to the group of men, each one with a look of respect for him, but not necessarily for her. She could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up, unsure of why she was there. The conversation started, and it was clear from the outset that the stakes were higher than anything Mariah had ever dealt with. Discussions about money, power, and influence flowed effortlessly between Dominic and his associates. But as they talked, Mariah felt herself slipping into the background, uncertain of how to contribute. She was about to remain silent when Dominic glanced at her. His eyes were steady, reassuring. He was waiting for her. Without thinking, Mariah spoke. It wasn't much, just a suggestion about an approach to a problem that had been discussed, but it was enough. The room fell silent for a moment, and the men looked at her, as if they were processing what she had just said. Dominic's gaze never left her, and after a few seconds, one of the men nodded. "That's a good idea," he said, and the conversation moved forward. Mariah felt a rush of relief wash over her. She had spoken up, and her words had been taken seriously. From that moment on, she was no longer just an observer. She was a part of the team, trusted with the kind of responsibility she had never thought possible. As the meeting concluded, Dominic stood up, his usual air of authority never wavering. He walked over to her, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Well done," he said simply. It was more than just a compliment. It was confirmation that she was becoming someone who mattered in this world. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, decisions, and late nights. Mariah was working harder than she ever had in her life, but she felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. With each passing day, she was becoming more than just someone who served drinks or cleaned tables. She was becoming a key player in Dominic's world. But even as her confidence grew, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still things she didn't fully understand. The world she had stepped into was dangerous, and Dominic's empire was filled with people who would do whatever it took to maintain power. Mariah knew she had to be careful. One evening, after a particularly long day, Dominic asked to speak with her privately. The weight of his request made her heart race. Was she in trouble? Had she made a mistake? She followed him to his office, where he was waiting for her, standing by the window overlooking the city. "Mariah," he began, his voice serious. "You've done well. I'm proud of the progress you've made. But I need you to understand something." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "What is it?" she asked. Dominic turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "This life we're living, it's not easy. There are things that go on behind the scenes that you may not be prepared for. And the decisions we make have consequences. I need you to be ready for that." Mariah nodded, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. She had known that the world Dominic lived in was dangerous, but hearing him say it so directly made her realize just how deep she was getting involved. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, but her mind racing. Dominic studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Good. Because once you're in, there's no turning back. You'll be a part of everything, for better or worse." The weight of his words settled on her, but she didn't flinch. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. "I'm ready," she repeated. Dominic gave her a small nod, his gaze softening just a bit. Then we moved forward. As Mariah left his office that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change even more. She had stepped into a world she didn't fully understand, but there was no turning back. Dominic had given her a chance, and now, it was up to her to prove that she was worthy of it. The following days were filled with a whirlwind of new tasks and responsibilities. Mariah was no longer just an observer in Dominic's world. She was now a participant, a trusted member of his inner circle. The work was demanding, pushing her in ways she had never imagined. Every day, there were decisions to be made, meetings to attend, and tasks that required her full attention. She felt a sense of pride that she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she wasn't just working to survive, she was working to build something that mattered. However, with this newfound responsibility came the weight of the world. Dominic had warned her about the consequences of the decisions they were making, and Mariah felt that weight each day. She had entered a world where every move had to be calculated, where there was no room for mistakes. The pressure was immense, but she was determined not to fail. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, Dominic called her into his office. The door was closed, and the air felt thick with anticipation. As Mariah walked in, she couldn't help but notice the change in the atmosphere. Dominic's usual calm demeanor was replaced with something more intense, more focused. She had seen him like this before, and it made her feel both nervous and excited. "Mariah, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. She nodded, stepping further into the room. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the uncertainty building inside her. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "There are people who don't want you here," he said, his words striking like a blow to the chest. "They don't think you belong in this world. They think you're too inexperienced, too." He paused, searching for the right word, before continuing, "Too weak." Mariah's breath caught in her throat. She had always known that the world she was stepping into was dangerous, but hearing Dominic speak so directly about the threats she was facing made everything feel so real. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's eyes softened slightly. "I'm not worried about you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I need you to understand that there are people who will try to undermine you, to test you. They'll see how far they can push you. I won't let them get to you, but you have to be prepared." Mariah felt a chill run down her spine. She had already known that working for Dominic meant facing challenges, but this was different. This wasn't just about business or money, it was about survival. She had to prove herself, not just to Dominic, but to everyone who doubted her. "What do I do?" she asked, the question leaving her mouth before she could think it through. Dominic smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You do what you've always done, be strong, be smart, and trust your instincts," he said. "And when it's time, you make your move." The words settled in Mariah's chest, filling her with both fear and determination. She wasn't just playing a role in Dominic's world anymore. She was part of the game. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a chance. She wasn't just a servant, a background player in someone else's story. She was in control of her own fate. Dominic stood up from his desk and walked toward her, his presence imposing as always. "I'm giving you the opportunity of a lifetime, Mariah," he said, his voice low but full of conviction. "But you have to show them that you belong here. You have to prove to them, and to yourself, that you're not weak." Mariah nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. She was ready for whatever came next. "I won't disappoint you," she said, her voice steady and filled with determination. Dominic's eyes searched hers for a moment, and then he gave a small nod of approval. "Good," he said, his voice softer now. "You're not just part of this now, Mariah. You're in it, and I'm not going to let anyone push you out." Mariah felt a surge of gratitude, but also a deep sense of responsibility. She was no longer just a spectator in this world. She was an active participant, and the choices she made from this point forward would shape her future. The world Dominic had introduced her to was dangerous, yes, but it was also full of opportunities. Opportunities that she could seize if she played the game right. As she left his office, the weight of the conversation hung heavily in the air. The path ahead was unclear, filled with risks and challenges, but for the first time, Mariah felt like she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this world. She was someone who was ready to take control of her own destiny, and she would prove, to everyone, that she was not weak. Mariah's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. What had started as a simple offer to work with Dominic, the man who had seen something in her, had grown into something far more complex. Every day, the challenges became more demanding, and with each passing hour, she was faced with decisions that could alter the course of her future. But one thing was certain, she was no longer invisible. Dominic had given her a seat at the table, and she was making her mark. But as she became more involved in the business, the stakes grew higher, and the pressure began to mount. There were moments when she questioned herself, when the weight of the decisions she was making threatened to overwhelm her. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Dominic called her into his office again. The tone in his voice was different this time, more urgent, and it immediately put Mariah on edge. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they were telling her that something was coming, something big. When she entered the office, Dominic was standing by the window, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the city below. The usual calmness in his demeanor was gone. He looked like a man preparing for something, and Mariah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be drawn into whatever was happening. "Mariah, come in," Dominic said without turning around. She stepped in, closing the door behind her, and stood quietly, waiting for him to speak. The silence stretched on, filling the room with tension. Finally, Dominic spoke, his voice low but firm. "There are things happening in the organization that you need to know about," he said, turning to face her. His eyes were hard, focused, and there was an edge to his tone that Mariah had never heard before. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease growing inside her. "We have a problem," Dominic replied. "There are people within our ranks who are trying to undermine me, trying to take control of what we've built." Mariah's heart skipped a beat. She had known that the world Dominic ran was dangerous, but hearing him speak about betrayal, about threats from within, made everything feel so much more real. "How serious is it?" she asked, her mind racing with possibilities. Dominic's gaze never left hers as he spoke. "Serious enough that I need to move fast. And I need you with me, Mariah. I need someone I can trust to handle the details." Mariah nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to back down now. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, ready to do whatever it took. Dominic stepped forward, his expression more intense than ever. "I need you to help me find out who's behind this. I need you to dig, to gather information, and to do it without drawing attention. We can't afford mistakes." Mariah felt a wave of adrenaline rush through her. This wasn't the kind of task she had expected when she first agreed to work with Dominic, but it was the kind of challenge she knew she couldn't ignore. This was her moment to prove herself, to show Dominic that he had made the right choice in trusting her. "I can handle it," she said, her voice unwavering. Dominic's eyes softened just a fraction. "I know you can. But be careful. Whoever's behind this is smart, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way." The warning hung in the air, but Mariah was determined. She had been underestimated for too long, and now, she wasn't just going to play the part. She was going to take control. As she left Dominic's office, the weight of the task ahead pressed down on her, but she wasn't afraid. She had learned from the best. Dominic had shown her how to navigate this world, how to make decisions with confidence and precision. And now, it was her turn to prove herself. She spent the next few days gathering information, following leads, and watching for any signs of betrayal. The more she dug, the more she realized just how deep the treachery went. It wasn't just one person trying to bring Dominic down. It was a network, a group of people working behind the scenes, pulling strings to weaken him. But Mariah wasn't going to let that happen. She was determined to find them, to expose them for what they were. As the days passed, the pressure intensified. Mariah felt the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders, but she also felt something else, power. The power that came from knowing she was in control of her own fate. She wasn't just a passive participant anymore. She was an active player in the game, and she was playing to win. One evening, after a long day of gathering intel, she returned to Dominic's office, her mind buzzing with the information she had uncovered. She knew this was the moment. She had everything she needed. When she entered the office, Dominic was waiting for her, his gaze sharp as always. "What have you got?" he asked, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. Mariah took a deep breath and walked over to the desk, laying out the evidence she had gathered. "It's worse than we thought," she said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "There's a group of people within your organization who are working together. They've been feeding information to your competitors, and they've been trying to discredit you." Dominic studied the papers, his expression unreadable. "Do you have names?" he asked. Mariah nodded. "Yes. I've got everything we need to take them down." Dominic's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in a long while, she saw something in his gaze, respect. "You've done well, Mariah," he said, his voice low but filled with approval. "Now we finish this." Mariah felt a surge of pride rush through her. This was it. This was her moment. She wasn't just the woman who served drinks anymore. She was the one who had uncovered the truth, who had taken control of her own future. And now, she was going to help Dominic protect everything they had built. The weight of the information Mariah had uncovered hung heavily in the air as she stood in Dominic's office, waiting for him to absorb the gravity of the situation. The papers she had presented laid out the treachery in plain sight. A network of trusted individuals within his own organization working behind his back, feeding information to his competitors, undermining everything he had built. It was more than just disloyalty. It was betrayal at the highest level, and it ran deep. Dominic's eyes never left the papers as he processed what she had told him. His jaw was clenched tight, his expression unreadable, but Mariah could see the storm brewing behind his gaze. She knew that in this world, betrayal wasn't something that could be taken lightly. His empire was built on trust, and now it was being threatened from within. Finally, he looked up at her, his eyes dark and intense. "You've done well," he said, his voice low, steady. "This is exactly what I needed to know." Mariah felt a surge of pride. She had done it. She had uncovered the truth, had brought the darkness into the light. But that pride was tempered by the knowledge of what came next. Dominic was no stranger to dealing with threats, but this was different. This wasn't just a rival group trying to take him down. It was people he trusted, people who had been working for him, feeding him lies. Mariah could sense the tension in the room as he stood, walking slowly around the office, his mind clearly racing. "Do you know who they are?" Dominic asked, his voice cold. "Yes," Mariah replied, her voice calm, despite the whirlwind inside her. "I've got the names, the details. I followed every lead." Dominic nodded once, sharply. "Good. We'll deal with this swiftly. No one betrays me and gets away with it." His words were calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to his voice. Mariah knew that when Dominic spoke like this, he was not just making a statement. He was laying down a line that would not be crossed. "What's the next step?" she asked, the urgency in her voice clear. Dominic turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not just here to dig up the dirt, Mariah," he said. "You're in this now, all the way. You'll help me handle it. I need someone I can trust to make sure this is cleaned up, completely." Mariah nodded. She had already crossed a line when she stepped into this world, and now there was no going back. But she wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she was more determined than ever to prove that she was more than just someone who served drinks. She was a part of something bigger. "I'm ready," she said. Dominic's gaze softened just a fraction, and for a brief moment, he looked almost human. The cold, calculating man she had come to know was still there, but in that moment, there was something else, something that suggested he trusted her more than he let on. "Good," he said, his voice low. "You've earned this, Mariah. But remember, there's no room for mistakes. Not in this world." As he spoke, Mariah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The weight of his words was not lost on her. She had known from the start that this wasn't going to be easy, but now, with the full extent of the danger laid out before her, she understood just how high the stakes were. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Dominic's lips curled into a small smile, the first real one she had seen in days. It was fleeting, but it was enough to make her feel like she had gained a level of approval that was hard to come by in his world. "I know you won't," he said, his voice firm but warm. "Now let's take care of this." The two of them worked quickly, moving with a sense of urgency as they planned how to handle the traitors within Dominic's organization. It was a delicate operation, one that had to be carried out with precision and speed. Mariah was right in the middle of it, coordinating the logistics, making sure everything was handled with care. The power Dominic held was immense, but it was his ability to manage these situations with such control that set him apart. They weren't just going to eliminate the threat. They were going to do it in a way that would send a message to anyone who might think of crossing him in the future. As the night wore on, the plan came together. Dominic had made his decisions, and Mariah was tasked with executing them. It was as if she had been thrust into a new role, one that was both thrilling and terrifying. But she didn't hesitate. The time for doubt was over. When the moment came, Mariah followed Dominic's lead, making sure the betrayal was dealt with swiftly and without mercy. By the time the sun began to rise, the traitors had been exposed, their futures sealed. It was a victory, but there was no celebration. In Dominic's world, there was no room for celebration after such things. There was only the cold satisfaction of a job well done. As Mariah stood beside him, watching the sunrise from his office window, she realized just how much she had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this world, uncertain and afraid. She had become someone who could handle whatever came her way, someone who could stand beside Dominic and be trusted with the most important tasks. And as she looked at him, she knew that she had earned her place by his side. The weeks that followed the cleanup of the betrayal were a blur of action, decisions, and consequences. Mariah had proven herself, again and again. Dominic's trust in her had only deepened, and the tasks she was given grew in weight and complexity. She wasn't just a player in his world anymore. She was becoming essential to its operations. And with each challenge she faced, her confidence grew, though the reality of the world she had stepped into never escaped her. Every day brought new tests. Some were small, handling routine decisions, keeping things running smoothly behind the scenes, but others were critical, ones that could change the balance of power in Dominic's empire. It was in moments like these, when the stakes felt at their highest, that Mariah found herself pushing forward, determined to prove that she belonged. But there were also moments of doubt. The world she had entered wasn't kind, and while she had risen to the occasion so far, she still couldn't shake the feeling that it could all crumble at any moment. As the nights grew longer and the tension within Dominic's organization continued to rise, there was an air of uncertainty. The rumors of discontent weren't completely gone. Power was always shifting, and those who had once been loyal could just as easily become enemies. One evening, as the weight of the day bore down on her, Mariah found herself back in Dominic's office. This time, he wasn't just standing by the window as he had so many times before. He was sitting behind his desk, staring at a set of documents that seemed to weigh more than they appeared. When he looked up at her, his expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of something deeper, something she hadn't seen before. "Mariah," he began, his voice low, steady. "I know this world is a lot for you. I know I've asked a lot from you." His words caught her off guard. She had never heard him speak like this, so vulnerable, so open. "But you've done well," he continued. "Better than I ever imagined." Mariah was taken aback. Was this a test? Or was he simply acknowledging her contributions? Either way, it felt like something had changed. It was as if she had passed through another layer of his world, one where she wasn't just a worker, but someone who mattered to him. "I never thought I would be in this position," she said softly, looking down at her hands. "But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then, without warning, he stood up from behind his desk and walked over to her. "I've been watching you, Mariah," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "And I want you to know that you're no longer just a part of the machine. You've earned your place here." His words sent a ripple through her. She had always known she was capable of more, but hearing him say it, hearing him recognize her effort, was a validation she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I've worked hard for this." Dominic gave a slight smile, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her feel something shift between them. "You've earned more than just my trust, Mariah. You've earned my respect." There was a pause, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Mariah felt a wave of gratitude, but also a sense of responsibility. She wasn't just a part of this world anymore. She was becoming a force in it. "I won't let you down," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Dominic's eyes softened, the usual steel behind them replaced with something that felt almost human. "I know you won't." And in that moment, Mariah understood that her life had changed forever. She had stepped into a world of power, danger, and complexity, but it was a world that now belonged to her, as much as it belonged to Dominic. There was no going back from this. But for the first time, Mariah wasn't afraid. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this world. She was stronger, smarter, and more capable than she had ever known. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and the risks were high, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready. Ready to stand by Dominic's side, ready to face whatever came next, and ready to show the world, just like Dominic had, that she would not be overlooked. She had earned her place, and now, she was going to take control of her future. Discover a captivating tale of strength, ambition, and unexpected connections in this gripping story. As the protagonist navigates the treacherous waters of power, betrayal, and loyalty, a deep and undeniable bond begins to form with the powerful figure who offers her a chance to step into a world she never thought possible. This is not just another story about rising through the ranks, but one that weaves romance stories into the very fabric of determination and self-discovery. As the plot unfolds, Mariah, a woman underestimated by everyone around her, transforms into a key player in a dangerous world of intrigue and strategy. Romance stories are often filled with tension, but this one adds layers of trust, respect, and personal growth, making it an unforgettable journey. The stakes get higher, and the complexities of loyalty and betrayal become even more intense as the characters grow closer. Their connection evolves from a simple professional alliance to something deeper and more profound, showing how even in the most challenging environments, romance stories can flourish amidst chaos. Mariah's journey is one of learning, trusting, and taking risks, and through it all, she discovers not only her own strength, but also the unexpected power of love that blooms in the most unlikely places. The story continues to unfold, showing how romance stories don't always follow traditional paths, but can lead to the most meaningful relationships when you least expect it. Join Mariah as she faces the challenges of power, love, and loyalty, proving that romance stories are more than just about falling in love. They are about finding your place and fighting for it.